This is Robert Kraft, and I'm your host on SNN Network. And today for this SNN Live, we have Michael Klein on the program. He is the chairman and CEO of iCAD. It's a publicly traded company. The symbol is ICAD on NASDAQ. Michael, thank you for joining me today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So let's get started with a quick overview and history of iCAD.
Sure. Well, the company was started in about 25 years ago, and it was originally a company that was involved in medical printing and using scanners to print out images that were captured on film. And then about 20 years ago, the company, which is originally called Howtech, acquired a AI company or computer-aided detection company called CADX, and it changed its name to iCAD and suddenly moved from being a printer, or you might say an analog company, into more of a digital age company and into the realm of what we now know today as artificial intelligence. But it's been about a 20-year journey to get to where the company is today. And clearly a very different company today than it was when it started out being involved in printing. The word AI hadn't even been invented.
Yeah, AI must have meant something else at the time. Whatever that was, we don't know yet. But one of the main reasons I invited you on today is because you had some really positive results from 2019. And now, before we get to those highlights, though, I really wanted to know what would you say makes the company and your products unique and different compared to your peers out there?
Yeah, well, first of all, there aren't a lot of companies. There's a lot of talk about AI, but there aren't a lot of people who are actually really doing it. In fact, one of the biggest forms of competition is that the term is commoditized and overused, and in fact, a lot of people don't know the difference between big data, deep learning, machine learning. So we have a real product. It's FDA approved. It's a company that has revenue, as you saw in the fourth quarter. It had on the AI side of the business almost $23 million of revenue, and it's been growing. And it's products that are tied to a major disease area, that of course being breast cancer, where there's 40 million images taken a year. And one of the things that makes our area different is that there's probably no bigger area where we have more data generated in medicine than in breast cancer each year, where there's 40 million new images that are captured each year. And given the fact that these new images, in order to read them, there are now hundreds of images for one woman. That makes the number of people being screened and the number of images so explosive that it's getting to the point that it's almost beyond the human capability to see, interpret, and be accurate without fatiguing and missing things. So that makes it really different, and also therein what makes a great opportunity for AI to sort of take root.
You alluded to my next question, and that has to do with highlights from 2019. As you mentioned, the company saw some revenue growth, 22% year over year to be exact. So let's go through that. What were some of the highlights for 2019, and including maybe some reasons for this growth that you saw?
Sure. Well, we think the important thing was this increase of 35% over the fourth quarter of 2018. So that shows a continuing trajectory of growth. And of that, in the cancer detection segment, that area in particular was a 39% growth over 2018. And then when we look specifically at the products themselves, because there's also service revenue which lags, the product revenue over 2018, again, same quarter, was 59%. So what we're seeing is continued acceleration of growth, and large growth in the fourth quarter, and new growth of new installs, which ultimately lead to service revenues that lag by a year once the warranties are over. So we're seeing increased adoption, acceleration, and we did have a goal of hitting 500 installs in our first year after FDA approval, and we hit it. In fact, we exceeded it. Big growth fourth quarter.
Gotcha. And I have to ask too, because I know my audience is probably wondering, mention all this, accelerated growth over the last year and quarter over quarter as well. For your customer base, what are they seeing as the value prop for each of your product lines you're seeing more and more adoption?
Yeah, it's a good question. The on the AI side, there's two sides. So there's the AI side and the therapy side. On the AI side, we have this what we call the trifecta, a triple win, and it was a 52.5% reduction in reading time, which is a big deal. If a radiologist costs $250 an hour, you're literally saving $125 an hour. So that's number one of the trifecta, is reduced reading time. Number two is the improved sensitivity, which means we're finding 8% more cancers than the physicians are finding when they're reading 3D tomographic images, tomosynthesis images, without the software. And there are a lot of sites that find 500 cancers a year. So this is 40 more cancers. That's 40 lives, 40 families, and each of these institutions that we're finding that they're not finding without the software. And then what's also important is that you can get high sensitivity, but you don't want high false positives. So we also had the third claim, which was a 7% improvement in specificity, which equates to lower false positives. Mm-hmm. So usually when you get higher sensitivity, it comes at the expense of having more false positives. We actually were able to get all three at the same time: quicker reading time, better detection, and reduced callbacks all at the same time. And it pays for itself because the physicians are able to reduce their time spent reading, thereby paying for the technology.
Got it. And what's your background? I mean, how'd you come into all this?
I've always been interested in medicine. I started at Becton Dickinson in the 90s after coming out of GE. Where I sort of went up the chain in GE, but I got into medical almost 30 years ago, and went into Becton Dickinson, came up the sales chain through national accounts, wound up running a division called BD Medical, needles, syringes, blood collection tubes. Then I moved out to the Silicon Valley, and I was running a part of Varian Oncology, which is a linear accelerator radiation oncology company. And then around 2000, right before the dot-com bubble, everybody out in the Silicon Valley was getting involved in startups. And I said, let me try my hand at this. Let me see what I can do. And that's when I found this small startup company called R2, which was taking satellite reconnaissance data, and the information was in DARPA, and we were able to secure the rights to commercialize this military technology that was separating military targets from civilian targets, and applied that to human anatomy into breast images. So we gathered a couple 100,000 images, and were able to get an FDA PMA claim that indicated that we could find cancers, at a level that was equal or as good, and in some cases better than the physician. And together, the physician plus the technology worked definitely better than either alone. That then led to my second startup, which was off the radiation therapy part of this business. So in some ways, today's business at iCAD are two companies that R2, which was a company that I ran that was acquired by Hologic, of which we think the successor company was iCAD. And then iCAD acquired my second company, Zoft. So basically, when I returned about 15 months ago, it was literally like a dynamic where I felt as though I had given up my kids for adoption at 13 and then gotten them back again at 22 without having to pay for college. And I knew all the people, I knew both of the industries. And since that time, we've been just having a great time bringing forward two very elegant technologies with tremendous scalability. And that's sort of the history combined with the recent trajectory.
So Michael, from what you can tell us, what are some of the company's plans to compound on the success that you saw in 2019 for 2020?
All right, as we finished 2019, as I mentioned earlier, we sold over 500 systems, software systems. We had to build the sales force, the service channels, all of the technical capability at the same time as we were selling. In fact, we literally were thinking to ourselves, we were changing the tires on the car while it was going 80 miles an hour. As we go into 2020, we have all of that in place now. So we expect, continued acceleration of the growth from last year. The other thing we're going to be introducing this year, which is going to build upon the already installed base, which we obviously expect to sell more of going into 2020, And that is that instead of just showing what is detected on an image, we're also going to go back and show the clinician and the patient, the woman, the prior year's images, because they've had these prior year's images that they've stored for many years, but they didn't have the software to read them. I often think of our capability almost like Photoshop might be to a camera. Except we see things that may not be obvious in the images. So we will go back and look at the prior year's images. And if a woman has a probability score today and it's unchanged from the prior years, that would actually make the probability score today much lower because there was no change. But what if we looked at the prior year scores and we saw that the probability of there being a problem was 10% and it had grown to 30%, and now this year it's showing up at 50%. That's a very different interpretation of the same 50% number as if the 50% number was flat. Now we're seeing change. So what we're doing this year is introducing what we call Panorama, which is a panoramic look backwards, looking at your prior scores off your prior images. And then we're going to compare women, not to the millions of other women that are in our database, but women exactly like the woman whose images we just looked at over time. We'll compare that woman's risk factors to other women with similar risk characteristics. And once we do that, we believe we're now combining radiomics imaging with genomics and risk factors for the first database that'll have all combined, a full panoramic view that will move us from what is currently an age-based screening paradigm where you just get screened once a year no matter what your risk, to more of a risk adaptive model where patients at a higher risk will get more frequently screened, and those that may have lower risk may be screened less frequently. That's the big launch for 2020.
And Michael, where can our audience go and find more information about iCAD?
Go on our website, www.icadmed.com.
Michael, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to our next chat.
You got it. It was a pleasure.